Welcome to Season 10 of CX in the Wild. 10 seasons of conversations with the visionaries who are reshaping the world, one experience at a time. This season, we go further into the minds of those who challenge the status quo and reimagine what's possible. And now, the adventure continues.
Welcome back to CX in the Wild. I am in New York City. This is the first stop of our World Tour 2025. And to just break the ice, I've invited my friend, Raj Iyer. He's a product expert, but also a teacher. He has so many great things to say. And honestly, he just spent like 20 minutes helping my son think about how to break into the job market in New York City. So with that, it's just such a pleasure to have you on CX in the Wild. Thank you for stopping by this Airbnb just to have a conversation. What's been going on in your life? I know you're teaching a lot. What are you teaching these kids these days besides my son?
Well, look, firstly, Dennis, thanks for having me, and thanks for finding a location super convenient for me.
Yeah, so we booked this right by your house.
New York is like it's easy and it's hard. Yeah, look, so I have a couple of things I think I talk about with certainly students and with people at all sort of stages. Unfortunately, I'm at a point where I can look back on a lot of lessons learned. And I think they all kind of revolve around a theme of, driving outcomes, right? I think one of the things that has developed sort of nicely in the last 10, 15 years is product management and client experience as disciplines have become more structured. Right? These are areas that, if you look back, certainly when I started, didn't really have a lot of structure in terms of common methodologies, common tools. Tools didn't really exist. And although I think we did a really good job, there just wasn't sort of a profession around it as much as it is now. And it certainly grew up with tech. I think one of the things that I focus on with sort of this cohort I mentioned is, don't get lost in the methodology. Don't get lost in the tools. These things come and go. They evolve. Where you add value to a business, right, to your partners, to your clients, is focusing on an outcome that they're trying to deliver, right? So the tools are just that. They're tools. Right. The tools are there. I always think of it, and certainly when I teach in the class I teach, I tend to think of it as I'm giving you exposure to a large set of learnings in the industry over decades. Right. Some are online tools, some are textbook tools, some are exercises, but they're all really there to kind of mix and match for situations that you're trying to solve a business problem in. Or a people problem in.
I agree with that because as you may remember, I taught for a few years and you're so right. So much is changing. And each of us, if we were carpenters, if we were woods craftsmen, we would use our tools in different ways. And what I try to kick off all the semesters with is, I'm not here to teach you to do what I do. I'm here to teach you to think the way I think. And that helps you understand why a chisel might be good for one thing and a mallet versus a hammer versus a file. But when you tackle your particular challenge, you'll need to know how to use these tools, but you'll approach them differently. And I'll tell you, I'm in the middle of a project now. We're forced to analyze a HubSpot and a Salesforce integration that is enterprise-wide. And the teams that made those decisions and implemented them are long gone. And the versions have evolved. So maybe even if they were a perfect handshake in the beginning, 10 years later, maybe not so much. And they're just tools. And so people are, there's this discussion of how do we fix the tools? And today I was with the team and it was great because they have a new chief technical officer, and she was very open and she had a very keen eye to what the challenges and the resources were. And so I felt comfortable saying, hey, maybe we should talk about the tools. Maybe we don't need 2 hammers for a nail. Like maybe we could start over and actually focus on what we need to achieve, the outcomes, and then figure out which tools we need. And I love the discussion because she was open to it. Now, I think as professionals, we know that's kind of a sticky, complicated thing to discuss, replace, switch. Sometimes it's easier to throw a little more duct tape on something, which most of us have been forced to do it at a few times. But you're so right. It is about, I think, staying agile in your thinking, having an awareness of the tools. But there's more to it. What else is there?
Well, okay. So let me flip it around, right? Which is, and we'll kind of come back to organizational change and resistance, which is its own topic, right? And I usually spend a couple of days on that, right? But large things, right? So say an enterprise-wide CRM upgrade, even not even like say deployment, but say you're like something's, it's not. It's covering 3 out of 5 things that you want to achieve, and you want to cover 5 out of 5 or six things, right? New things. They take organizational focus, right? And they take an organization to come together and stay together on a goal for a period of time, right? So you can't be shifting strategy in the middle, right? So you can't be, okay, Raj and Dennis came in, we looked at it and we're like, hey, we're going to tell you what to do. Right? Because a couple of things happen, right? One is people who've been working on it for 2 years are, not going to be happy with that. So one of the things that I think is kind of important, right, is you have to kind of know where you are in a project cycle, right? And one of the things I do is I still kind of talk in these sort of large terms, right? Like project, right? Because I think some people aren't as comfortable with that. They just want kind of initiatives running deeply, but you have to have a goal that you're focused on. You have to kind of know where you are in that cycle in order to figure out what tools are appropriate, right? Starting over again, say, is a tool. That's not always appropriate if you're kind of midstream on something. So timing is important. Kind of building in organizational agility while you're building is probably the key, right? It's kind of knowing, I said sort of outcome driven, and that outcome driven is I think the way I meant it was sort of project outcome, right? So to your point about like a CRM, what are you trying to achieve, right? You're trying to achieve, faster revenue realization, like whatever the goals are, you could probably potentially achieve given some of the constraints that are there, right? Or better visibility into performance and potentially better visibility into how your marketing spend is going and, et cetera, right? Maybe you're not as happy with how you're targeting and what your kind of your client metrics are, right? So you can kind of get there, I think, with sometimes shorter term things, and sometimes you need a more thorough rethink of where you are. But I think it really is based on where you are in that cycle and kind of how effective it is. What I would say is while you're there, it's your Band-Aid thing, right? Maybe a couple of Band-Aids kind of solve it, right? Yeah, you get someone to write some reports and pull some data, and now you have like a new dashboard, and it's great, right? Like that can work. That usually, like, frankly, that works in a lot of cases. Not as a work, meaning it solves the immediate problem. But while you're doing that, what I'd argue is try to get the vision aligned organizationally as to where it can go next. Put a dollar number against where it can go next. And then start building the organization to get there, right? And it is hard, right? It depends. It really is very organization specific. Different people have different experiences. But if you're able to kind of say, look, this is going to solve your immediate problem, but the things that we can do going forward require us rethinking the way we're doing it.
And
Yeah.
to your point, it's not always easy to judge how deep the water is from the surface.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I did a lot of math, a lot of customer experience, strategy, and planning for a brand. And it made sense on paper. Like in theory, my solution was solid, logical. Then when I applied the revenue advantages to it, still checked out just fine. And in fact, it was great. Like I was able to realize by a couple of small changes to extend the customer lifetime value to the extent, which I only had extended like 1 or 2 months, and there would be 15% money available, like a lot of money. And so then I start running it up the flagpole, and it starts making past. It makes all the checks and balances. These guys say it's okay. My managers, my leaders, my department, it gets up to the finance guys. They're like, all your math checks out. Sounds like you did your homework. I'm like, great. And I get to the chief technical officer and I'm like, I've ran the gauntlet, jumped through all the hoops. Here it is. And he said, that's a hard no. And I said, it's a hard no? And he's like, we're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. And I was like, why? Can you just you seem really serious about this. No, he's like, I'm dead serious. And he said, here was his reasoning. He said, here's what you don't know, what you didn't put in your plan is how deep this water is. He said, when we go into our peak seasons, our servers, our technology that we have built that's running right now, we do $1 million per minute in transactions around the clock. If you change anything and something happens, we're going to be losing $1 million per minute. And you think about the pressure there. Your plan has to have a route that avoids any risk of that. And so that's a realization, because to your point, had I known that, my revenue numbers were good, but had I been able to get the organization aligned and say, look, this money is out here, but this is our risk. And there is a path this way, but it's not going to be in the year I think it is. It might be like 6 or 7 years, but we can get there. Now the IT organization is aligned. They're like, okay, we'd have to create this separate system, test it at $1 million per minute to see if it works before we start the migration. But I didn't have that path.
So that's a great point, right? So I kind of I parked the discussion on organizational change a little bit, right? So in a lot of ways, anything that we're doing, right, is changing the way an organization works, right? The word you use, alignment, is super important, right? And that's a lesson learned for me over years, right? Because there are lots of great ideas, right? Like there are a lot of good ideas. Maybe they're not great. Maybe I can't claim to have great ideas, but it's certainly good ideas, right? Over the years. I think that organizational filter of does this align with the organization is actually more important in a lot of cases than the hard business case, right? Because, and this goes back to the discussion I was having at this table like half an hour ago, you can in your mind see, wow, this is just these widgets, like everyone's going to want these widgets, but if you're trying to pitch that to a company that doesn't want to make widgets and it's not in their DNA, that's a hard pitch, right? And I think I'm going to drill deeper into that, right? And that's an easy example, is depending on who you're talking to, they value their role in the company and kind of what they're responsible for in different ways, right? And companies go through cycles too, right? In an organization. A company that has a business, right? Say this company, right? That has clearly built a nice critical mass, recurring revenue, recurring customers, is going to be worried about, losing them through some bad like a bad headline would be worse for them than the small incremental 10% or 5% improvement in some innovation that can be driven, right? And there are headlines all over the place, even now, right? Like there's one that, that I see all the time now where that bad headline could take months. Sometimes you don't recover from it, right? So if you're talking to a company who's worried about that and they're at that stage and they haven't kind of figured out how to launch the new thing while they're doing the small thing. And that's obviously why companies, do these experiments a little bit to the side, right? Like they'll find ways of doing these. That's super important, right? You may also find a sponsor who's looking and saying, look, I really need to find something innovative right now. Like that, like we're in a cycle now where we're tapped out, and that pitch is just a different pitch to that person as opposed to your CTO who's worried about resilience or whatever. But that alignment, I think, is in a lot of ways. I would say a lot of it. I think it's always the first filter you put on. Like, does this make sense for this company and this person I'm talking to? And that's super important, right? Because again, it's and not everything's a good fit for everyone at that time.
It's true, and a lot of it is teamwork. Alignment has a lot to do with teamwork and being goal oriented with other folks. And it's so simple to see in some perspectives in our own lives and so difficult to see in others. And what I would say this makes me think of is, if you think of going into a market or going into a job search like my son or whatever it is, when you go, it's like you're going, he's moved to New York. It's like going to the airport. And when I go to the airport, I know what city I need to get to. So I align with the staff and the jet that has the map to get there, and that alignment it seems so obvious. I wouldn't just go to the airport and say, does any of these planes have a seat?
Yeah.
and expect an outcome.
And that's great, right? Because that is the way people typically build projects out.
Yeah.
And so working backwards, right? Which is again now it's like become more of a methodology in a way, right? Like working backwards. So but is super important. And I guess it goes back to kind of like knowing the outcome, what you're trying to achieve. I'll go on a little bit of a tangent and go back to the old days of product. The old days of product, when I kind of started in this space, we spent an inordinate amount of time planning what we were going to do. Like most of the year was spent thinking about where we wanted to be 2 years, 3 years down the road, right? The actual implementation was, I'd almost say like we planned more than we implemented, right? Because so much of the time was taken up with that. It was manual. It was, stuff that didn't have names now has names. You're doing expert interviews, you're doing, surveys, you're doing whatever, but you got to understand the market where you were headed. And then you formed a consensus around that. And then you acted as an organization, whatever atomic level of kind of organization. It was your business unit. It was the whole, large multinational company. It was your small startup, whatever it was, right? But you kind of aligned, and certainly as a small startup, you didn't have the luxury of spending most of the year, doing market research. But I do think even when you're not able to devote, like I'd argue that the best thing to do is devote that time. But if you can't, understand that you're kind of needing to establish those goals and outcomes in an articulate way, no matter what. Certainly in a relatively, and I think we're both talking about relatively mature organizations at some level of maturity, right? Yeah. Not, we probably would think differently if we were just sort of, just like brainstorming, ideas. But I think and we all, I think, work in environments variously of trying to affect change. And frankly, even if we were brainstorming some new, a new form of energy that's, whatever, that like everyone's going to want, you're still convincing other people to use it.
Right.
And it's change for them. And so you do have to constantly bring it back to what you're trying to achieve. I think that's the goal. And again, we go back to the beginning of this. There are tools to do that. You can bring people together in a room. You can articulate with numbers. You can articulate with risk assessments. You can, however, you can do videos. You can,
And it's so true what you said. I often go back to this saying, people love innovation, but they hate change. and it's so true. Having a destination that you can get people to also see the value in and unite to get there, I think is so important to what you're saying. You make me think about that. And while I think in one context, all of that is true, what I would also say is that strangely, everything seems to be going so much faster these days, and you alluded to it, and almost being having high adaptability. And, I would say that when I go around the world, I can see it. There are some people look at the world and they look at race or religion, but I look at these archetypes. And I can see certain parts of the world where their aptitude for adaptability and change, that whole archetype, their whole culture has begun to speed up and they can make decisions faster. And then I see more traditional parts of the world with archetypes. And it's just an interesting dynamic.
So I'm going to go back to your CTO. This is just a guess. Some parts of the world have more to risk with change, and some have more to gain relatively with change. They're coming from a different starting point where change has more upside, or in their lifetimes, change has been a net positive. And so they can kind of have this muscle memory of saying, things go fast, but it's good. Whereas other places might look at, well, things go good. Wait a second. Let's think about this before we do it, right? And it's historical, it's cultural. There's no one kind of metric or one dimension to look at. But I think I would agree with you. The other advantage you have, I have, when you go to places, you go less. You're not living there, so you can see things in snippets. Where, you can say 5 years ago, it was like this oh my God, that's crazy. Can you imagine in 5 years, it went from, there were no buildings here to, there's buildings and a highway and a subway system. And, how did that happen? Right. I do think that's perspective too. Right. So I think certainly,
but let's be real.
Yeah.
They were working on LaGuardia for 30 years.
Well, no, I'm not saying LaGuardia is a good example.
but meanwhile, the pothole down from my street, they've been trying to fix my street I've been living there for 11 years. They just finished it. I'm like, how long does it take to fix a road?
So I'm not giving those as examples of where change is embraced.
Yeah, exactly. But I do find that places like Dubai.
Yeah.
They innovate, but what's interesting about it is, and I want to hear your perspective. Let's just consider all things equal. There's risk and there's reward. There's success and there's failure, but there's a decision in there. And I imagine if we really thought about it, the failures, we all know that the failures are instrumental in your learning to be successful. But I just find in Dubai, they don't seem to punish people for bad ideas, or the teams don't seem to criticize or critique or label with fear the idea. Like, I'll just be honest. I feel like in the United States, I see fear as a motivator in a lot of situations. Fear of failure, fear of not hitting your numbers, fear of not succeeding, fear of losing your job, fear of all this stuff, right? But then when I go to places like Dubai, and I don't just go for a day or two. I'm opening an office there next month. Wow. I have an office in Africa now, with staff in a building, like doing work. So I'm seeing and experiencing these cultures, and some places they almost like, they're like, you don't have to be, we're pretty sure we're not going to get this right the first few times. So let's all just like say, okay, and let's get on with it.
So you're right. I mean, like fear is a good word for it. But I still go back to your example of the CTO who has, in the back of his mind, like, oh my God, our servers can't take this, right? Like I don't know Dubai as well. I know Dubai, like I know it a little bit. That maybe goes to my thesis of like, they've had an experience for 25 years where
fast change is
good. And it generally has benefited them, right? And,
fair point.
A little earlier, when I was younger, it was Singapore, right? Singapore was where, people went for it was the global shopping mall of a certain region, right? It was where like you could get anything, was Singapore, right? Singapore matured. It went through kind of a maturity cycle. And they're both locations I don't know super well, right? But, that burst of where like, Singapore was the shopping mall of certainly Asia for a while, not like a bigger region. Dubai is like took that over at some point where that became the hub where everyone kind of was going to. They have that lived experience of, again, I haven't interviewed people there. I haven't, but just from the out, like having kind of just gone through it a little bit, that is the experience, right? So you kind of feel like, we tried this. We kind of bumped into it a couple of times and it was fine. Like we know that that the net result is good.
Yeah, that's really a good point.
And I think in other and you're right, it could be a mindset thing, right? Like it's not necessarily a by the books and by the numbers analysis, because like frankly, you could argue your pothole guy, person, the crew, right, who had to fix your pothole, by the numbers, probably had a lot to gain by doing it 10 years ago. But whatever the mechanisms were, like it wasn't a rational thing that it took 10 years or 11 years.
Or if we're going by the book, my pothole guy, he probably did 25,000 potholes leading up to mine, and Absolutely. He's super efficient and nailing it for the whole city. There's like 25,000 other neighborhoods where like, great job, and I'm the one.
You're the one
like, what's wrong with this?
But I would have to say, I think we've all had experiences where you don't have to wait. Like there's a way to make that system. It's not about the person or the crew who's doing. I mean, clearly, like they know what they're doing, but it's about the system kind of, to a point, taking that risk and saying, let's go ahead and do it. And once I do think it's possible to move from that to a more dynamic. Because we've all seen it in places in the world, right? Like we've all seen it where there were very stagnant economies, and in the last 30 years, they've grown tremendously, right? Overall, growth, and the U.S. has actually, I think, done relatively well through that. It's kind of kept its bearings, right, in terms of technology and I was going to say media. I'm not as sure about that. I don't know it as well, but like in terms of kind of the things it does well.
But so much, you make me think, and just to be humble and thoughtful about and respectful of the conversation. My pothole experience it's mine, and all of us have our own unique experiences. And maybe in Dubai, maybe they are a little more fearful of change than I think, or whatever. And it comes down to the individual, like what are you willing to do? But I do think change is inevitable. I think humans are natural born adapters to whatever happens. I mean, we can survive in this hot and the cold. I mean, we figure it out. So I guess, it's probably just my naivete about the greater humankind that one place would be more innovative than another because, it's factors. That takes a lot of factors.
And it changes.
I
mean, places that embrace change, and this is something we can look at more. Again, I'm not as knowledgeable about it. I would tend to think it's cyclical in some ways. It's not uniformly. I think we're at a certain point in time where people look at, they do the measurement now and they're like, oh my God, I can draw the graph and it goes down. And, so things are going down. I think over time, things emerge. To your point about adaptability, people don't like living with that pothole forever. They figure it out. They figure out how to fill it in. They, whatever you have to do, you have to keep knocking on some doors, fill out the forms again, or ask about why is this the system, right? People, I think given for the most part, left to their devices, will figure out better ways of doing things because that's what people like to do.
So speaking of their own devices, no pun intended, just to wrap this up, being that you are helping young people with technology management, and one thing's for certain, AI, technology, the internet, technology is changing quite quickly. I think humans, as we adapt to these changes, are changing quickly. And managing change within organizations is a real concern and an expertise for some navigating that. What are you looking at? What are you reading up or studying or focusing on in 2025? Like to just keep your mind sort of wrapped around as many of these big subjects as.
Oh boy, I wish I could tell you I have I do have a good reading list, but it tends to be all over the place. What I was looking at recently were examples of what I call project failures, right? There's a whole literature around it. I don't know why it clicked into my head. January came back. Why do large initiatives, and it doesn't have to be super large, but why do anything that you can have a case study written about? Yeah. What are the reasons that they, I'll say fail, right? Because usually that's what it's called. It's called a failure, even though the project usually gets done. It's over budget. It's late. It's So I don't think it's particularly a book, but I've been kind of looking at different authors over the last few decades actually, and what they've kind of been looking at for why projects didn't succeed, right? And honestly, a lot of it has to do, not like we talk about organizational alignment, it's within the project and how this alignment is actually, when I kicked off, part of my thinking was I was reading some of these articles this weekend about lack of alignment, right? So that's a little bit of lessons learned. Maybe in January, I'm kind of going through lessons learned and what's been written in the in the literature about this.
It's so funny. I watch pretty much only YouTube and TikTok. I don't watch normal TV anymore.
Your phone with TikTok is worth a lot of money, according to my daughter.
Wow, that's nice to know. Well, the thing that I've been watching, and I watch all these people comment on why DC movies didn't do as well as Marvel movies. And I've watched so many conversations, analysts about it, fans, people who are into the lore, comic book aficionados, storytellers, whatever, people who are well steeped in a way of looking at things. And I look at the Marvel franchise and the DC franchise, and I look at it through a customer experience lens. And I can tell you the exact reason why one was more successful than the other, which is in the Marvel universe, people who watched the movies could envision themselves as one of the heroes. And in the DC comics, you don't know which one you are. Like, other than Batman or Superman, but now that they've made all of the characters try to have all of these dimensional personalities, you're like, I don't know which one I am. I can't connect my self-identity. The fact of the matter is, whether it's in change management in your organization or watching a movie, we all want to be the heroes of our own stories. So if we don't see ourselves in the hero of your change management, then we're done.
That's a great way to end this. No, that's perfect, right? Because you as someone trying to get something done need to elevate the people around you for sure, right? That's key. That's a great way to end this. Okay.
Raj, thank you so much for stopping by and being my first guest on the podcast in New York. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Great. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you for being part of this journey with us. We hope these conversations challenge your thinking and inspire you to explore new paths. There's so much more to discover. Keep listening, dive into more episodes, and let's continue this adventure together.